Rachel Thompson always knew that to her mother, she was just another name on the family tree, someone without shine or significance. Growing up as the neglected daughter of Margaret Thompson, the ruthless CEO of Thompson Luxury Estates, meant living in the shadow of a woman who saw success only in show and influence. While her sister Jenny was treated like the jewel of the family, amassing a following on social media and taking on a front-line role in the company, Rachel struggled quietly behind the scenes. She had risen to the position of accounting director on her own merit, without favors or shortcuts. Married to David, the company's capable sales director, and mother to Oliver, an 8-year-old boy who radiated joy, Rachel had built a life based on values her family would never understand: honesty, hard work, and true love. Even though Rachel was treated coldly by her mother and sister, she never stopped Oliver from keeping in touch with them. The boy loved spending weekends at his grandmother's mansion, where he was spoiled with expensive gifts and luxurious experiences. To Margaret and Jenny, he was the perfect accessory to their glamorous lives, an adorable grandson for photo ops, but with no real regard for who his mother was. Rachel watched this happen and swallowed the pain. She didn't need their validation, or so she told herself. But that all changed that morning at the airport, when the illusion of a close-knit family was shattered once and for all. The trip to Hawaii had been announced with great enthusiasm by Margaret as an exclusive family event. Rachel had not allowed herself to get her hopes up, but when her mother mentioned reserved tickets and a luxurious itinerary, she allowed herself to believe, for the first time in years, that perhaps she had been wrong about them. David, ever watchful, did not share her optimism. He was well aware of the power play and manipulation that sustained the Thompsons. But when the three of them arrived at the airport that morning, ready to board, reality hit them like a slam dunk. The airline attendant looked up their names on the reservation and, after a few moments of typing, looked up with a polite but impersonal smile. "I'm sorry, but there are no tickets for you on this trip." The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. Rachel turned to her mother, waiting for some explanation, some plausible justification. But all she got was a blank stare and a cold reply. "I never said the trip was for everyone," Margaret declared, adjusting her designer bag as if it were a mere inconvenience, not a calculated act of exclusion. Jenny, beside her, smiled condescendingly, holding her cell phone up to her face to record another farewell story. "Don't be upset, Rachel. It was something more intimate, you know, for the real family." The words cut deep, but the cruelest blow came next. Oliver, holding his mother's hand, looked at his grandmother and aunt with tears streaming down his face. He didn't understand. How could he? Until that moment, his grandmother had been synonymous with affection, expensive gifts, happy moments. Now, there, in the middle of that crowded airport, he saw his own family leave without him. "But, Grandma?" The childish voice wavered, hope shattering in his confused expression. Rachel felt something inside her shatter. She could handle the rejection, but seeing her son being treated that way, that she would not forgive, ever. For a moment, everything around her seemed to slow down. The blare of the loudspeakers announcing flights, the sound of suitcases rolling across the marble floor, the muffled conversations of the passengers, none of it seemed real. Rachel felt her chest burn with indignation, but she kept her voice steady. "So that's it? You brought us all the way here just to humiliate us?" Margaret raised an eyebrow, as if dealing with a sullen child. "Rachel, honestly, don't be so dramatic. This trip was supposed to be relaxing, and you've always been stressful." The contempt in her words was as obvious as it was cruel. Jenny huffed, scrolling through her phone without even looking at her sister. "You know that kind of thing doesn't suit you, right? Hawaii, 5-star resorts, sunset cocktails. Let's be real." David, who had been silent until then, stepped forward, coming face to face with Margaret. "You guys are unbelievable," he said, his voice thick with a mixture of anger and contempt. "Did you really think you could humiliate us like that and move on like nothing happened?" Jenny gave a wry chuckle. "I guess we already have." Rachel looked at Oliver, who kept his eyes fixed on his grandmother, waiting, begging for an explanation that would never come. But Margaret didn't even bother to say goodbye. With a careless wave, she simply turned her back and walked away, Jenny at her side, both of them walking towards the boarding gate without looking back. The scene was absurd, surreal. Rachel felt a tightness in her chest when she saw Oliver sobbing softly. He was trying to swallow his tears, trying to be strong, but he was just a child. And at that moment, she realized that he wasn't a priority for those women. David, who had already expected something like this, crouched down next to his son and wiped his tears with firm, sure hands. "Hey, champ, forget it. We have a plane to catch too." Rachel frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" David smiled, taking the tickets from his jacket pocket. "Disney World. I booked everything. I knew they would do something. Now let's go. Because Mickey won't wait." Oliver blinked, still trying to understand. The tear-stained little face now reflected something new. "Hope. Disney," he repeated, his voice still choked. David nodded with a smile. "Exactly. And I heard that Buzz Lightyear really wants to meet a certain boy named Oliver." Rachel felt a lump in her throat. The way David held his son's hand, the light in Oliver's eyes starting to return. It meant everything. Her real family was here, not on the other side of the boarding gate. Rachel took a deep breath and wiped her eyes. She could waste time dwelling on the humiliation her mother and sister had just inflicted on them, or she could do something better. Move on. Margaret and Jenny could have Hawaii, the luxury resorts, the carefully edited Instagram photos. She had something infinitely more valuable. They headed to the American Airlines check-in counter, and within half an hour they were seated on the plane, ready for takeoff. Oliver, now excited, talked non-stop about the toys he wanted to see first. The crying at the airport seemed far away, replaced by the childlike excitement that Rachel loved so much. As the plane took off, she looked out the window, watching the city lights fade away. At that moment, something inside her changed. She was no longer the submissive daughter who accepted crumbs of attention from her mother and sister. She was Rachel Thompson. Mother, wife, successful professional. And from that moment on, she would accept nothing less than what she deserved. While Rachel, David, and Oliver were having magical days at Disney, enjoying every moment without having to prove anything to anyone, Margaret and Jenny were busy putting on a digital spectacle. The beaches of Hawaii served as the backdrop for meticulously planned photos, full of captions about family moments and gratitude for a perfect life. In the stories, there was exaggerated laughter, glasses of champagne raised at sunset. But off camera, the truth was different. Jenny complained about the heat ruining her makeup. Margaret got irritated with every small delay in the resort service, and the silence between the two, when they weren't showing off for the public, became increasingly evident. Without someone to admire her greatness, Margaret had no audience. And without an audience, there was nothing left but an empty existence. Meanwhile, across the country, a much more real problem was unfolding at Thompson Luxury Estates. With Rachel and David gone, the company's numbers were starting to fall apart. The tax auditor who had asked for clarification on the new accounting system Rachel had implemented received no convincing answers from the remaining staff. Without her to explain and correct the inconsistencies, a clerical error that could have been fixed in minutes became a bomb waiting to explode. To make matters worse, one of the most influential clients, the Wilson Corporation, was expressing dissatisfaction with Margaret's negligent management and threatening to pull out of the multi-million-dollar contract. But the Thompson matriarch was too busy documenting her perfect life on social media to notice that her empire was crumbling beneath her feet. The final blow came when the Wilson Corporation officially terminated the contract. The news hit the Thompson Luxury Estates headquarters like a bombshell. Without Rachel to keep the numbers in check and David to manage sales, the company began to bleed financially. Disengaged employees, dissatisfied customers, and a growing distrust of the market became problems that were impossible to ignore. When Margaret finally returned from Hawaii and walked into the office, she found a tense environment, far from the grandeur she had always liked to flaunt. For the first time, she realized that something was very, very wrong. But pride still spoke louder. "We'll fix this," she decreed, as if her mere presence would be enough to bring order to the chaos. Only this time, no one seemed willing to follow her orders blindly. She was no longer feared. Desperate, Margaret tried to contact Rachel. She called several times, sent messages, even asked Jenny to try to convince her, but the calls went unanswered. Rachel was in no hurry. She, David, and Oliver were still at Disney, enjoying every second away from the toxicity of that family. This wasn't a game of revenge. This was freedom. When Margaret realized that she wouldn't be able to manipulate her so easily, she swallowed her pride and decided to do what she had never imagined. She went to Rachel's house. She stood in front of the door, hesitant, feeling a nervousness that was unfamiliar to her. When she finally rang the doorbell, Rachel opened it, but her expression showed neither anger nor satisfaction. Just a cold, calculated look. "You need my help, don't you?" Margaret swallowed hard. Yes, she did. And this time, she knew she would have no control over what would come next. The silence between them lasted longer than Margaret would have liked. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't in control of the situation. She'd always been the imposing woman, the one who called the shots, the one who decided who was valued and who was disposable. But now, standing on the doorstep of the daughter she'd spent years ignoring, she was forced to face a reality she'd never wanted to admit. Rachel didn't need her, but she needed Rachel. "Can we talk?" Margaret finally said, her voice lacking its usual firmness. Rachel crossed her arms and tilted her head slightly. "About what? About how stressful I am? Or maybe about how I'm not part of the real family?" Margaret took a deep breath, stifling her frustration. "I've made mistakes, Rachel. A lot of them." Rachel's eyebrows arched, as if she hadn't expected her mother to admit it out loud. Still, she didn't move. "Mistakes?" she repeated. "You left us behind at the airport like we were nothing. You used my son as a social media prop and then discarded him. You and Jenny live for appearances, while I've been here, carrying this company on my back, never getting a shred of recognition." Margaret's chest tightened, but she knew Rachel was right. "I get it," she said with a sigh, "and that's why I'm here. The company, it's sinking. We need you. I need you." For the first time, Margaret sounded genuinely vulnerable, but Rachel just laughed humorlessly. "Too late, Mom. David and I are starting our own company, Thompson Family Real Estate. And you know what? The clients who really matter have already figured out where the expertise lies." The blow was brutal. Margaret felt her legs weaken, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. Rachel watched her without a trace of pity. It was a game Margaret had always played well, but now she was on the other side of defeat. "Rachel, please. We can talk about this. We can work it out." But her daughter just crossed her arms, impassive. "Work it out? How? You want me to save the company that scorned me? To save you and Jenny after everything?" "No, Mom. Not this time." Margaret opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. For the first time in her life, she no longer had control over the narrative. And Rachel knew it. "You always treated me like I was lesser, like I should be grateful for the crumbs you gave me. But look where we are now. I'm growing up, while you're about to lose everything." Margaret felt the weight of those words, and for the first time in years, saw Rachel as she really was, a strong, determined woman, someone who no longer needed to fight for her approval. Rachel sighed, now more at ease. "Look, I don't wish you harm, but I'm not going to bow down to you anymore. If you want to hate me for it, that's your problem." She looked at her mother for a moment, assessing her dejected expression. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to grow." And without another word, she closed the door. Margaret stood in front of the closed door, feeling an emptiness she had never known. She had always had it all: money, power, status. But for the first time, she lacked the one thing that mattered most: control. The silent house before her seemed to symbolize everything she had lost. Jenny, who had lived in her mother's shadow until then, had no answers either. The Thompson empire was crumbling, and this time there was no one to right the wrongs. Time passed, and one by one, Clients began to flock to Rachel and David's company. The market was unforgiving. The Thompson name was no longer synonymous with exclusivity and luxury. Now it was just a reminder of an era of arrogance that had come to an end. Months turned into a year. Thompson Luxury Estates had to close offices, sell properties, and drastically downsize its lifestyle. Margaret and Jenny disappeared from social media, with nothing to show for it but memories of a past that no longer existed. It was only in solitude that Margaret truly understood what she had done. For the first time, without the spotlight, without the false praise, without the bubble of superiority she had created for herself, she saw the truth. It wasn't Rachel who needed her. She was the one who had always needed Rachel. It was only then that she found the strength to do something she never thought she would do. On Christmas Eve, Rachel heard the doorbell ring. She hadn't expected visitors. Oliver was playing near the Christmas tree, enchanted by the twinkling lights, while David was preparing the last glasses of wine for the toast. When she opened the door, she found Margaret and Jenny standing there. No jewelry, no fancy dresses, no more of their usual swagger. Margaret was holding a small wrapped box and a homemade cake, something so unexpected that it took Rachel a few seconds to process it. I made this for you, Margaret said hesitantly. It's not a big deal, but I thought. Her voice trailed off. She looked different, smaller, almost unrecognizable. Jenny, beside her, kept her head down, her smiles gone. Rachel watched the two of them for a moment. She could have sent them away. She could have closed the door like she had done before. But something inside her hesitated. Oliver appeared at her side, holding her hand, and looked at her grandmother. Grandma, his voice was barely a whisper. Margaret took a deep breath and knelt down to her grandson's level. I'm so sorry, honey, she said, her eyes filling with tears. I messed up so bad. Rachel felt a lump in her throat. She didn't trust them yet. She didn't know if her regret was real or just a consequence of the fall. But there, on Christmas Eve, surrounded by everything that really mattered, she made a decision. Forgiveness might not come right away, but it could start with an open door. Without a word, she stepped aside, allowing Margaret and Jenny to enter. It was a first step, nothing more. But sometimes one step was all it took to start over.